And I hope we are live. We should be live. I am tweeting the tweet out into the Twitters to let everyone know that we are live for another Friday night stream, a hashtag TQIF event. But we're doing a channel first. We're not doing a Tex-Trek podcast. This isn't going to be affiliated with the podcast or listed with the podcast. This is going to be a stream exclusive to YouTube. And we're talking about something other than Star Trek, which we've never done before, and I feel nervous about doing, but we're doing it now. But I think it's very appropriate. I think we have a good opportunity here to talk about another franchise, another property. It's kind of topical right now. And before I bring on my guests, I just want to give everyone a little introduction and kind of establish why I decided to do this. But a lot of people might know there is this particular filmmaker, this particular storyteller, this particular creative. He has kind of a unique style. Maybe not everyone can get into it, but he's very talented. I think he's sometimes misunderstood, and he created this really, really special work of art. I would go as far to say that the powers that be at Warner Brothers, I think, didn't always treat it right, and it wasn't always handled properly, and I think a lot of people have never seen it in like the proper form. You should enjoy this work of art, but luckily HBO Max right now is streaming this thing in HD, and it looks great, and it has been restored. And of course, I'm talking about Joe Michael Straczynski and the '90s cult sci-fi classic Babylon 5. And so to discuss that, I'm bringing on a few guests. I have Earl Grey Trekkie with us, who is watching Babylon 5 for the first time ever right now.
Hiya.
I also have my frequent collaborative partner, Dave, who is a massive fan of Babylon 5, and specifically Season 1 of Babylon 5, which we're going to be kind of focusing on right now. And last but not least, I actually have the most knowledgeable B5 fan I have ever met, the one and only Brian.
Hello. My knowledge of B5 is not nearly as comprehensive as I wish it was.
It's still pretty
Always
impressive.
Growing. Valerie, I feel like I thought you should have introduced us as diplomats, hustlers, entrepreneurs, and wanderers.
Wonders. Yeah, that would have been a good one. But yeah, it's okay if you haven't seen Babylon 5. We're not gonna spoil it. We're gonna try to mainly talk about Season 1. That's all Robbie has seen. If you're a long-term fan, though, I think there's gonna be some fun stuff to talk about here. If you're a fan of Star Trek and you haven't watched Babylon 5, I think you should certainly check it out. And I hope that we can explain why over the course of this conversation. But I just want each of us to kind of give our Babylon 5 origin story. Like, how did we first get into it? And I guess I'll go first, and then we'll just go around the room. But for me, I was a kid when this show was first coming out. I never really got into it. I would see like previews for it and stuff, and I would every now and then I actually caught a couple of episodes. There's a few episodes I remember watching before I knew much about the show. I always struggled though with, I guess, comparing it to Star Trek. It was around the same time I was really becoming a major Star Trek fan. The CGI really put me off. I wasn't used to watching CGI. It was kind of a new special effect, and this early version of it just looked too cartoony for me. My brain couldn't handle it. I just wanted them to have like normal model ships, like every other science fiction show I had seen. But eventually, I got more and more glimpses at it when it moved to TNT. I guess in the late 90s, they had like a couple like made-for-TV movies, and I caught a few of those. I tried to watch like the spin-off show when it started, Crusade. Didn't really get into that. I tried to watch the Rangers spin-off they did on Sci-Fi, and it wasn't until like 2003 or so whenever they started putting it on DVD. I got that first DVD box set. The DVD box set was a new thing. Like Next Generation had just come out on DVD box set, and it was kind of like the first show I'd ever seen, be released like that. And I tried that first season DVD. I was in high school at this point, and I watched like that whole first season, all 22 episodes of it, and I was hooked. I was like, okay, I get it now. I needed to see like all of the stuff from the very beginning, establish the world here, see the type of storytelling that they're doing, the type of world building they're doing, and now I'm sold. I got to that last episode of season 1 with that big season finale cliffhanger stuff, and I was like, I have to see season 2. I have to keep watching this show, and I've loved it ever since. But Robbie, how did you get into Babylon 5?
Well, Jill in the chat had talked about Babylon 5 all the time, and I'd wondered, I'd never seen it, and I was interested in watching it. And then also I saw on Twitter that it had got remastered, and I'd heard that it was quite a weird show, and it was a bit like Deep Space Nine in some senses. So I watched the pilot, and I was drawn to Londo's performance, his enthusiastic, jovial, a bit wacky nature. And since then I was hooked, although that wasn't an amazing episode, but I just liked the character interactions a lot. And then I think it was Soul Hunter that really got me on board.
So you're a Londo fan. You're gonna go on a roller coaster.
I mean, I don't want to set things up too much or speak too much to events to come, but I think that Londo is among the characters that I consider kind of at the heart of the show, and I don't think that's giving away too much. I think he's a key character, and I loved watching him over the course of the show.
Yeah, he might end up actually, when everything's said and done, he might have like the biggest arc.
I think so. Yeah, there's arguably a few other possibilities, but
I would argue that the number of graceful turns to Londo's story might exceed that of any other sci-fi character on television that I can think of, as far as the number of turns. I'm not saying it's a better story, but they're and done well. I mean, I've seen characters who are just kind of all over the place.
Well, with some shows, they lose the ability to write the characters as the characters, and they just take the character wherever the plot wants to take them, and it comes off as very unnatural and inorganic. I never feel that way with the Babylon 5 characters.
Yeah.
Dave, what about you? How did you get into it?
Only his hair felt unnatural.
Yeah. Well, there's a funny story about that, but maybe we'll get to it later.
So, I've talked before on Tex-Trek about in the 80s having a sort of love-hate thing with Star Trek Next Generation. I was happy to have new Star Trek, but I was kind of brutally compared it to TOS all the time, and so I felt on the outs with it quite often, including by the time it ended. And in the early 90s, I don't think I really had any interest in Deep Space Nine. But my brother, who was a big sci-fi nerd and is a few years older than me, and he read all the sci-fi magazines like Starlog and Cinefantastique and all this other stuff, he knew about Babylon 5 like a month or a year before it happened. And he was telling me about all this stuff that it was going to have, that it was going to be different, that it was going to have Harlan Ellison as a consultant, and people were going to, they were going to delve a little bit more into reality, and there would be drug abuse and realistic problems in politics and long character arcs that Star Trek wasn't doing. And my brother basically got me very hyped for this show. I think I somehow did not see the movie, The Gathering, which was the launch of it, right?
Right. And I didn't see that at first either. That wasn't included in the first season DVD. So I actually didn't see that until I'd seen the entire thing.
And I think you can come in on the first season just fine, but
I actually recommend it.
So that's what I did, and we started watching it when it hit. My brother had was I still living at home? I think I was. I was in high school in my senior year, and he had moved out, and we had a kind of ritual that was I don't know, part of my nostalgia for and fondness for watching it, which was we'd watch an episode and then have an immediate post-episode phone call where we'd kind of break it down and talk about what we liked, what we didn't, and especially early on, it was just crazy giddy enthusiasm. And we were always comparing it to Trek. We're like, Trek would never do this, Trek would never do that. And honestly, unfairly, I'm watching Deep Space Nine now for the first time, and like seeing how different they are in ways it's better than Babylon 5. But I don't need to start a war between them. I like both properties, and I just in the headspace I was in though at the time, it was like for me the perfect kind of counterpoint to where I was on Trek. And so yeah, I jumped in feet first and had a great time. Brian.
Well, I did see The Gathering when it was originally broadcast, but it was on Fox where I lived, and they had just started. It was literally the first thing I watched on the Fox station. They had just started doing Fox, and I think I'd looked at it once, and it was all staticky. Their signal was very weak, and it was very static, looked like shit. And so I said, well, whatever, I'm not watching that. And then a friend of mine, sometime later called and said, hey, there's this cool sci-fi on Fox. You got to watch it. It's on right now. And I caught it was right at the beginning. And I was like, well, okay, it's sci-fi, even though it's really staticky and really hard to make out any details. I will watch this because I'll watch anything sci-fi. And I don't know. I like the fact that I like Copeland's heavy electronic synthy guitar thingy that he was doing with the electronic guitar thingy he was doing with the soundtrack. And I thought, that's different. That's very not Star Trek. It does not sound...
Are you talking about the composer?
Yeah, the composer.
I thought it was like Christopher Frank or Frankie.
Frankie does everything else up until Crusade. Copeland, the guy who did Copeland, who did the soundtrack to the first Lethal Weapon movie, at least off the top of my head, and lots of other stuff, did the original version of The Gathering. Now, if you watch the special edition version, it's actually rescored by Christopher Frankie to fit more into the acoustic style of the rest of the show. You get
that musical sting when they show the station.
Yeah. So honestly, one of the things I liked about it was something they were going to ditch. But
yeah,
it felt very kind of formulaic and predictable for the most part. I was a seasoned Star Trek and Doctor Who fan by that point, and Star Wars, I suppose. And then there was no announcement about follow-ups, and I kind of forgot about it. And then much later, I was channel surfing, and I stumbled into a scene with Garibaldi and Londo, the "it can't be that bad" scene. Fans will probably know what scene I'm talking about. And I love that scene. I was like, oh my God, I don't know what this is, but I must watch. I don't even think I quite realized it was related to that other thing I saw over a year earlier. But I loved that scene, and I loved I wanted to know everything about this Londo guy because he told this cool story. And it turned out that's actually a bit of an exception to his character. Londo doesn't usually play the wise old man, and that was very much a wise old man moment. However,
it was a wise old man. It was a wise old man who is also trying to trick his friend into paying for his drink.
Well, yes, there's a punchline to it.
So,
but the best old wise old men are also up to some stuff. So they're the best ones are the ones who also pick your pocket. It turns out Londo isn't exactly that isn't a very representative scene for Londo, but that idea of writing the characters with some introspective, interesting approaches and points of view is very much baked into J. Michael Straczynski's writing, and shows up among almost all the characters get to play a wise old man at some point, or wise old woman. And so it did show up a lot. And I didn't regret watching it. I had a little trouble trying to figure out, keeping up with it, and really didn't get started till the beginning of season 2, but I'd seen enough at the end of some of the end of season 1 episodes. And I was like, I must see that. I was down and there for the beginning of season 2, and watched it all the way up until they took it away and put it on TNT. And I didn't have easy access to cable, so it was a long time till I saw season 5. But and Crusade and all of that other stuff was years and years later. But seasons 2, 3, and 4 I loved, and I thought it was great, and I was just as excited for that every week as I was for Star Trek. And yeah, it was some wonderful stuff. And I to this day, it's still one of my favorite things. And I consider Babylon 5 to be a honorary Star Trek, a black sheep Star Trek.
Galaxy Quest style?
Yeah, in the same way that Galaxy Quest is basically Star Trek, in the same way that Forbidden Planet is basically Star Trek. And
it was the proto Star Trek.
Yeah, the ancestor of Star Trek. And I dearly love this series, and having grown up watching classic Doctor Who, I think the production values are just fine. But
you know what? I liked a lot of stuff. I liked a lot of stuff with like cheesy old production value, but I think it was just the CGI was just it was just a little too new for me back in the early 90s.
Well, our Fox station was they had fixed the Fox transmission signal somewhat by the time I started really watching the show, so it didn't look absolutely terrible, but it was still soft enough that you didn't know if that was bad CGI or just bad transmissions.
Fascinating that this was far enough back that straight up the broadcast signal and all that was like a problem for you.
Yeah, well, I was in Fairbanks, Alaska, so though there was technology took a while to get there in some
It can
cases.
be a dangerous place.
Yes.
But speaking of the comparisons to Star Trek, there is a lot of connective tissue, both behind the camera and I guess in front of it. There are a couple of Star Trek actors that show up in the show, and including this first season. Behind the scenes, you had Dorothy Fontana, one of the most important writers in the Star Trek franchise, and also Harlan Ellison, both contributed to the show. Babylon 5 is kind of is unique in that J. Michael Straczynski did almost all of the writing, but in the first 2 seasons, there are a lot of episodes written by other people. And Harlan was actually credited as like
Story consultant?
Yeah, like some type of consultant. I think he was pretty involved with some of the early conceptual stuff. And if you think about like the Harlan Ellison version of City on the Edge of Forever, you know, a lot of Star Trek fans will know what I'm talking about. There was a very different version of that TOS episode that Harlan Ellison wrote that was rewritten, and they're pretty different if you compare his original draft with what was actually shot. But that story where you have like crew members of the Enterprise like doing drugs and you know, like weird stuff like that would actually be a very functional story in the Babylon 5 universe.
Correct.
So it's like that kind of approach. My girlfriend Antonia is watching it for the first time. She's only seen season 1 and the first episode of season 2, because I just wanted to see what she'd think about Sheridan. we might talk about that change and lead in a moment. But I asked her, you know, you've seen it for the first time now. What do you think about it? And she's watched all of Star Trek, and she said like it's kind of like the depressing Star Trek. It's like Star Trek, but if you took out like the optimism of like everything's going to be so much better in the future. It's like Star Trek, but like, oh yeah, there's still like poor people, you know, living on down below, scrounging for work or for money. There's still like war on Earth. Like there's even a mention in here of like battles in Israel and like it's like, oh, like the Palestinian conflicts are still happening in the 23rd century. So yeah, it is kind of like you get like that fun sci-fi intergalactic different species and stuff, and you can tell like these political stories or like these weird sci-fi concept stories, but all of our modern day BS problems that we have now, they're all still around there, and they're part of that setting. They're baked into it.
I'm very curious to hear about what Robbie's first take is on that, but finish your thought, Brian.
I will say that I think by the end you're in a bit more of a Star Trek place than when you started, and I think that's why. If the end of the show had the same tone as the beginning, I don't think I would be so. I don't think I would regard it as the stepchild or whatever of Star Trek the way that I do. So
Robbie, what's been your take as you have seen Star Trek, but this is kind of a new sci-fi. I don't know. You probably watched or maybe watched Battlestar Galactica.
I've not seen that yet. I've heard great things about
I was just thinking of other sci-fi that was kind of on that, somewhat more realistic, maybe a little grittier than Star Trek side. But yeah, how does it feel like it compares to you tonally to Star Trek?
It's quite different, obviously, because it's a bit darker. It does look a bit goofy, but I think that adds to the charm because the characters are all a bit out there and a bit wacky. But I thought it was a bit similar to DS9 in that, it's dark, but that's the beauty of it. It's unique, and it's just like Deep Space Nine was dark. It showed you why the optimistic future is so important. And I think Dr. Franklin was probably one of the strongest characters for me. I just found him really interesting, and I related to the kind of decisions he made throughout the show.
There was an early notable episode with him. What is it, Believers? Is that the one?
I'm guessing it's certainly an episode that focuses on him.
It was one of the ones that really kind of struck me as having like, part of it, like, when I was in my teens, late teens, and there's a little bit of, you got a little edgelord in you sometimes then, and I liked seeing the darker endings and stuff. It just felt more right to me. But I also thought that, it was played with this humanity that was never, it didn't feel like it was like an edgelord Star Trek. I felt that there was a humanity to it and I was drawn to Dr. Franklin as well. He was a character that stood out for me.
And then people who haven't seen that episode, it's like it's kind of a Star Trek, medical episode. It's like, oh, how do we deal with like this weird alien illness or something that's going on?
I think you could have absolutely adapted that as a Star Trek episode.
Yeah, it's very Star Trekian, and it does go very dark to where like they probably could have gotten away with it on Star Trek, but I don't know if they would have chose to. It's
Ron Moore would have wanted to do
it. Ron Moore would have done it. Yeah.
Yeah. For those who don't know, the short version is that there's a sick kid and his parents, their religious beliefs, they're aliens, and their religious beliefs interfere with what the prescribed medical treatment that the doctor needs to save his life, and the doctor kind of has to do what many a Star Trek doctor has done, which is kind of take a risk and try something that's dangerous and maybe morally dodgy, but also maybe the right thing, and it doesn't go so great.
His justification of it is something that you can kind of sympathize with, but still kind of question at the same time. Because he gives like this very passionate speech about how he basically says like fuck religion, like people come to us doctors, us learned men of science, when like their prayers don't work. Your gods didn't cut it. They didn't save you from cancer. They didn't like reattach your severed limb or whatever. You come to a doctor and you expect us to work the miracles and make that happen. And so he feels like entitled to be like, I'm going to decide what's best for this child.
There's ego in there as well.
Yeah,
which is what which is really what made it a standout episode, I think.
But yeah, he definitely shines in season 1. What are some other breakout characters for y'all? I think Jakar is my favorite, but they don't really get into the good Jakar stuff yet in season 1.
He's a little cartoonish in his kind of scheming and plays it very, very large. I had a friend who,
but he still gets that great ants scene where he talks about the ants on the plants.
The
giants, where the giants walk.
Oh, I don't remember it. So I haven't
to Sinclair's girlfriend when she has that close encounter with one of the old ones, with this mysterious, powerful, ancient alien entity. And Jakar has that speech to her and he actually saves her. He sent a Narn scouting party, I guess, like to go like be on the lookout for, because he knew she was going to go there and get in trouble. Mm-hmm. And he gives her this speech where he picks up this ant off of a plant, and he says, if I pick this ant up and set it down, how would it describe what just happened to it, to another ant? And that's basically what happened to you. There are these vastly mysterious, vastly powerful, vastly ancient things in space. kind of foreshadowing some of that stuff we see more of later in the show. And he says, like we can't even begin to understand them, and that actually gives me hope and excitement that there's still mysteries in the universe. When I was watching that with Antonia, she's like, "Oh, that's really." It was like one of the first times I heard her like really get into the show, because she was a little question. Like she questioned it at first, and she actually told me that she's glad that we skipped The Gathering. I just started her on the first like real episode, Midnight on the Firing Line, which is like it's a little bit more exciting. It opens with like a bunch of Centauri blowing up. That's how the show opens, and that kind of like sucked her in a little bit more. Where when I showed her The Gathering, she's like, "Oh yeah, like I wouldn't have wanted to sit through this if I saw this first." So Jill in the chat also recommends skipping The Gathering.
When you're breaking ground like Babylon 5 was, sometimes you stumble a little.
Yeah. I think The Gathering is not a great B5 episode. It's probably even below average, but I consider a lot of season 1 to be below average, and The Gathering, in as far as rating them, sits right there as a season 1 episode. It doesn't feel like it's wildly worse than a lot of the other stuff.
Brad, I think you might like season 1 the least out of all 4 of us. Just talk about our general impressions on it.
I have to admit it's if there's a reason I don't rewatch the series more, it's because my OCD says you must watch season 1, and but
the slog for you.
And there's some good stuff in there, but like the Jakar speech. If you love that speech, you're gonna love this show. Even if you're not on board yet, if you love that moment, you're gonna love the rest of the show. If you didn't love that moment, then maybe this is not the show for you. But and I will say that that episode probably does more to show us the surprise side of Jakar than almost anything else in season 1, just because there's so many things that are not the traditional bad guy actions and dialogue and stuff in that episode. Londo and Jakar are definitely my faves. I have another character I really like, but doesn't show up till later. So I'll perhaps reserve that for some future podcast.
About 10 years ago, a friend of mine was watching the show for the first time, and he was having a little bit of trouble getting into it. And I believe he was watching it with his wife, and she was kind of scoffing at it. I think she wasn't enjoying the experience, and I don't think she ended up watching it. But the way I suggested he kind of frame it is that it was almost more theatrical, that is to say theater, like a play, and that it had that same sort of slightly heightened melodrama of live theater, and sort of bigger acting, as if for an audience that's isn't going to get close-ups on a screen. And I think it did help him kind of frame it, because JMS, and he ended up watching it and really enjoying it. JMS writes larger than life. He almost has some of the TOS writing tradition, and he sometimes has a flair for dialogue, but he also sometimes has some very hammy stuff.
It's weird.
I think his sense of humor is pretty corny sometimes.
He's not as funny as he thinks he is, and that's the problem. Is that it's not that his jokes aren't funny; they're just not as funny as he thinks they are. Yeah. And so they take a good joke and beat it over the head with it, and keep going with it far past the point where it's funny. And so you were laughing it to begin with, and by the end you're rolling your eyes and wanting them to move on.
And it's weird, the type of things that, like, as far as dialogue goes, like sometimes he can write like these very like grounded, kind of just like blue collar, realistic type conversations and make that work really well. And then sometimes he does that same type of stuff, but it comes off as very inorganic. Or like sometimes he can write like these real deep, passionate, big, epic, grandiose speeches, and that really works. And then sometimes he shoots for that and it doesn't. So it is kind of just a little inconsistent all over the place in every department.
I think I have to say I'm trying to think of a grandiose monologue that I didn't at least kind of like. There were definitely some blue collar stuff where it was like, oh boy, that was. I can see you spent writing all the episodes for this entire season was clearly taking its toll on you at some points here.
Even at the time, I was very well aware in the early '90s that he was. I knew he was writing most or all of his stuff, and I would sometimes, get that sense, or maybe it was just the limitations of what his writing was. But I was like, man, if you are writing that many episodes, it's just a lot.
Yeah,
He didn't start writing all of them until season 3. Season 3, 4, and 5, he writes every episode except for Neil Gaiman came in and did one for some reason.
Well, Neil Gaiman, that's the reason.
Yeah, like Doctor Who lets him write episodes. It's just like
yeah.
But Doctor Who turned down Grant Morrison. But
what were you saying, Robbie?
I feel like Garibaldi had a lot of touching speeches. Sometimes when the music was going over a lot of what he said to, what's her name?
Ivanova? Or
yeah,
Talia?
Ivanova. I think they worked quite well, and I think Garibaldi, he didn't feel like too deep a character, but he did have some nice moments. He reminded me a bit of like a character from a Western.
Yeah.
I mean, he always looks like the first impression I always seem to have of him is Diet Bruce Willis from Die Hard, but he absolutely does. Oh God, now I'm blanking on the actor's name. Anyway, the actor who plays
Peter Doyle.
Peter Doyle, yes, absolutely does.
Something Doyle.
Jerry Doyle.
Jerry Doyle, yeah.
That's right. Yeah, he absolutely does a good job of making that character his own and doing lots of interesting things with him.
His face is fascinating to look at. His kind of like that skeptical look with all the furrowed brow, or his oh boy kind of look.
There's a certain largeness to the acting that reminds me a lot of classic Doctor Who.
I think he's a good fit for JMS scripts.
Yes.
And your father, you were talking about the characters, and I'm just going to throw out a few that were other. I mean, I think we should quick talk about Ivanova and the Minbari lady. Why can't I say her name?
Delenn.
I think there are a few other standouts in the series. What do y'all think about them?
Ivanova was kind of unique in that there weren't like a lot of shows that had like a young woman type of character in position in like such authority, and they never really like bring attention up like, hey, why are you like bossing us around? Like that was kind of a kind of a first. And
she was a bit of a bossy boss. It's kind of what people liked about her.
Yeah.
When she gives the speech, Ivanova is God.
Yeah. That got overly quoted by my sort of nerdy friends in the 90s and stuff, but they I can say legitimately people loved her character,
Yeah. No, I thought she was great. Rather perhaps unfairly said, Ivanova's so much better than Major Kira, but
as I'm watching DS9
that's blasphemous.
now, I'm sure I would have said that, and I probably will end up flip-flopping with it on it by the end. Yeah. But, again, I don't want it to turn it into a boxing match between the two properties. Yeah. But I did, by the way, I'm just going to say, I'm sure I was also in lust with Claudia Christian. She's a very pretty lady, and so there was that.
Yeah.
I saw her in person at a convention here in Austin. I think the 2010 Wizard World. I think the first year that we had it, she was there, and she's pretty cool. She was friendly. She liked to talk to friends and shake your hand and let you ask questions and stuff.
That's good. I like when someone in real, it's a bonus. I don't expect it, but it's nice when actors people playing characters I like are also pretty decent.
Yeah. It's unfortunate that so many of these actors are no longer with us. Like so many of them have passed away.
Yeah, it was not good for your lifespan to be on Babylon 5.
This is the TV series equivalent of the movie Poltergeist had a weird curse about it, with a lot of deaths associated with it.
It's like sometimes I'll be watching some of these scenes and it's like 4 or 5 characters in a room and I'll think like every single one of these people is dead now. Like, how is that possible?
Somebody in our comments just did a rest in peace to Len, because yes, of course, Mira Furlan died this year, and she was a great actress. She is another one of those that just anchored the hell out of that show over time.
Yeah, she made Delenn feel so real, and she has naturally a Yugoslavian accent, and she played Delenn with like that accent, and it worked. It made her feel like, forward and mysterious, and she is from another planet.
It's tough to play, I think, someone who is kind of ethereal and spiritual and stuff like that, and in such a way that it doesn't feel trite or too tropey, or it's those characters are not easy, and I think that she was another perfect actress for delivering some of those kind of melodramatic and occasionally quippy JMS lines.
Yeah, and she also manages to show a heart and a vulnerability that doesn't necessarily go with the spiritually enlightened wise woman thing. Right. She is both knows way more than you, understands way more than you, understands herself way more than you understand yourself, but is also you can imagine things that would just absolutely ruin her day and leave her upset and frustrated and sad and crying for the entire day. And you have no trouble conjuring what sort of events could do that. And that's kind of interesting that she could play such a powerful character who also is that vulnerable. Whereas it takes a lot to get Jacquard to cry.
Although you do see him cry in the show. He will keep watching. He will cry. You will see what makes Jacquard cry.
Yeah, you will get to see it. That's how I know how I can say that with confidence. But yeah, I loved Delenn. I loved her arc. I loved everything they did with her. I do kind of wish they could have kept the androgynous thing that they were originally going to go for with her character, which is in the original pilot. She wears this kind of heavy, almost masculine alien makeup and the idea was going to be to adjust the tone of the actress's voice so it sounded less feminine, and she was and they were going to refer to her as a he. And that was kind of going to be a thing for that first season. That is
interesting and very sort of forward thinking. I mean, I'm sure that the execution might not have been what we would consider perfectly progressive today, but that's an interesting thought.
Yeah, from what I understand, what is always cited as the deal breaker on it was that they couldn't find a way to modulate the voice without making it sound either A, incredibly artificial, or B, clearly feminine. And so when when the character shows up in the first proper episode, they're just she's female, and they even went back and redubbed the stuff they shot in the pilot before they released the pilot movie, and so that she was female from the beginning. But
when you watch The Gathering, all the aliens look a little different from how they will look throughout the rest of the show. That's another reason why I kind of don't like going back and watching that one, because it weirds me out when you see Londo's hair, Jacquard without the red eyes. Dave, I know that you're actually you, correct me if I'm wrong, prefer season 1 of Babylon 5.
I think that's sort of true. I'm kind of a fan in a different way from a lot of people, in that I don't tend to throw myself into fandom. I sort of have a point where that I reach with a lot of things that I like, where I'm like, well, I'm done with this for a while. I've had my fill, and I really enjoyed it, and I'm ready to kind of set it aside for years and years. So Babylon 5 was one where I think what happened is, over the course of the initial run, is I became a little bit more and more frustrated over the years with JMS's writing. So in some ways, that's not that there may be superior plotting and stuff going on in later seasons, but I was becoming more frustrated with his quirks as I became just more keenly aware of them. I actually have. This is the weird thing. I've never seen season 5. I've seen one all the way up through 4, but I've never seen season 5 because I got my fill and I was like, well, on to bigger and better things, on to something else. And so, but the first season was kind of special because I remember those fond memories, and it was a bonding thing with my brother. But it was even an episode where, I feel like it was kind of a middling episode, or maybe even a weaker one, like where they had the dock workers strike going on.
I love that episode. That's one of the best.
Is it a subplot, Fathery, or is that the A plot? I haven't watched it.
No, that's like the main plot.
Yeah,
that was something you couldn't do in Star Trek.
No, I was going to say that there are a few episodes in this season that emphatically are. Look at this. Star Trek would never do this. There's a
that's one that I recommend to people.
We were excited about it when it happened because we're just like this. We couldn't even conceive that a sci-fi show would ever do something like this, and it felt so rich. I felt like I always felt like I could kind of like, even with the mixture of CG exteriors and physical interiors, like Babylon 5 was a place that I could wander around. I kind of had a sense of, if not the layout, then of the individual places, and it felt really real to me. I felt like there was like that sense of there was a world going on beyond our principal heroes, that were the leads. That these kind of guys that the equivalent of the what do you call it? Star Trek. What's the new animated series called? Lower Decks. Yeah. The Lower Decks people were more visible throughout the series, and so that was like an episode that jumped out as something I liked. Even though I seem to remember I didn't love the writing on it. I think it felt a little clunky or something. But sometimes that was JMS.
Yeah, no, I love that there's an episode that's focused on a wildcat strike, and that they win, like the labor people win in that episode.
Yeah, that was a cool thematic.
And it's not like a both sides type of it's not like this very West Wing type of, let's just all come together and show the best in ourselves and give some Andy Sorkin speech, and then we win the day because we'll all just compromise, and it's no, it's like they did a wildcat strike and it worked.
I mean,
the powers that be caved.
Yeah, they win with a legal loophole. I mean, Sinclair certainly was on their side and found the loophole, but it's kind of that. It's a victory, but it's also a sort of a caveat about there's probably a lot of places where this loophole isn't going to work for other people and stuff. It's not the winning of a single battle rather than the winning of a war.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
But they win that day.
Yeah. I did think it was very odd when I watched it the first time, and just the whole idea of logistics was not something I'd ever really thought of. I was a kid at that point in my life, and I just was like, wow, I guess I never even considered the fact that people might have these sorts of problems. I guess it makes sense, though. I just, having grown up only watching Star Trek and Doctor Who, neither of which paid much attention to Lower Decks, it was kind of an eye-opening experience, educational eye-opening experience for me. I'd also say that the boxing one or whatever, TKO, kind of feels like something you would never see in Star Trek.
I remember thinking it was a little dopey, but it was also like this kind of goofy, fun, cool Mortal Kombat thing.
That was one that I saw out of context. That was one of the random episodes that I caught.
And let's see. I have a note saying War Drum was also one, but now I'm trying to remember what was War. Oh, War Drum was the Humans Hate Aliens episode.
I remember thinking at the time that was just, I was just like, oh my God, this really is entirely too literal, on the nose. And then I lived through the Trump years, and then I felt like it wasn't.
Yeah.
But I do still think that did that have Dorothy Fontana?
I think so. Dorothy Fontana wrote.
I remember.
She wrote Legacies. She wrote The War Prayer. Yeah, The War Prayer. That's the racist people one.
Yeah, I remember thinking, I was like, her writing is not a game anymore. But I respected the ideas, and sometimes that's how Babylon 5 was for me. I liked the idea more than the execution. But in that first season, by just a few other throwaways that I'm skimming now because I haven't actually watched it in a bit. Although I started rewatching The Gathering, and now I kind of am enthused to watch it. But I liked the Soul Hunter. I think people don't like that episode,
Yeah.
maybe, but I love that guy's portrayal. He's a known character actor with a great voice.
Who's done a lot of Star Trek,
Yeah, and he was also in was it Road Warrior? Or something
and
like that?
he was in Doctor Who.
Oh, and it was
It's
Max
Mark
Headroom.
Shepard, right?
He's
Yeah.
Blank Reg.
Yeah.
He's Blank Reg from Max Headroom.
Yeah.
But I remember like episodes like Babylon Squared. You know,
I love Babylon Squared. That might be my favorite of the season, but I love time travel. And
Yeah,
I love time travel in my Star Trek. I love it in my Babylon 5.
I want to hear Earl Grey Trekkie's opinion of Babylon Squared, because that's going to be a bit different than the rest
Right.
of ours.
Yeah, so Robbie, do you remember the Babylon Squared? That was the one where they see the Babylon 4 station appear from the past.
Oh yeah.
And they'll follow up on it in a future story that you haven't seen yet.
Yeah, I really liked it because it was intriguing and it reminded me of the Mirror Universe episodes of Deep Space Nine. When they went over, it was very tense, and I didn't know what to expect. I also Delenn. When I was watching, I was trying to figure out who played Delenn because I recognised her voice, and she was in Lost. That was where I recognised her from, and it was nice to see David Warner, Walter Koenig.
Yeah, more
remember-
Star Trek people.
Yeah, I can't remember the actor's name, but he was in The Wrath of Khan, and he played.
He played Joaquin in Wrath of Khan, and he was in the TNG episode Symbiosis,
Yeah,
where there's the one planet addicted to drugs from another planet, like in season.
he was
That was
also
in
the
season
star
1.
of the '80s TV show The Phoenix, which only went one season. He was like a wandering mystic, possibly alien kind of guy. Just look it up sometime. Look up that opening.
What were some of the standout episodes for you, Robbie, in season 1?
I would say that Soul Hunter was probably one of my favorite episodes. And
So you're not alone, Dave.
Somebody in the great maker in our comments also is also a fan.
Oh, Jill loves that one.
Yeah.
What other one? Any other ones, Robbie?
I'm struggling because I don't really know the names, but
Just the one where blank, fill it
Oh,
in.
yeah, yeah.
I really liked. It was one of the last ones when the older woman she was acting as a doctor against Dr. Franklin, and she was giving her life force to save people aboard the station illegally. But it turned out that she was dying.
Yeah.
And then Dr. Franklin and her both they both come to a mutual understanding, and she gets to go with her daughter back to Earth, I think it was. I thought that was quite a touching episode, and I did feel like there was going to be some kind of twist, but I just didn't know that would be the twist.
The quality of life. That was called the quality of life.
The twist is if this episode had happened before Believers would have ended differently.
There's also an episode called Signs and Portents, which, based on the name, it's all about like foreshadowing future seasons. Which must
That's also the title for
the name of the
season
season.
1.
Yeah.
Yeah, every season has its own title, and that is also the title of the season.
It's the one where they bring on Mr. Morden, and they set up his arc with Londo. And if you're watching it for the first time and you feel like there's a bunch of unanswered questions and mysteries, don't be frustrated that you don't know what's going on, because every single point that they bring up in that episode and don't explain will get explained within the next 4 seasons. This show doesn't really leave any loose ends untied.
Yeah, that's pretty notable. I grew up with X-Men comics and Chris Claremont's run when X-Men became the best-selling comic of all time, but he was known for always leaving all these dangling plots, and when he left the series, there were lots of them. It still happens today with shows. That's pretty impressive to be able to wrap all the big stuff up.
And JMS, Joe Michael Straczynski, he had this entire 5-season long arc planned out from day one. And they did have to alter it a little bit here and there. Notably, this doesn't really spoil anything to know this, but we lose our lead with Sinclair. We have to replace him with Sheridan in season 2, so we have a different commanding officer. But that actually, I think, benefited the show because there was so much stuff he wanted his main character to do. He's actually said this. He's like, oh, well, it made it a lot easier. Sinclair is just going to do like all this Minbari stuff, and I'll have Sheridan do like all these other things that I wanted Sinclair to do, but now it's actually better for someone else to do them. So,
I don't know. I kind of think JMS goes to some length to sometimes to reframe things that happened in the past to sound more positive than they necessarily were. And that's fine, but I do think it was a good trade.
Brian's like, liar.
No offense oh God, I'm blanking on his name now. I guess I'm offending him.
The Sinclair actor?
Yeah. God, why can I?
I can't think of his name either.
Oh, God.
Jeffrey O'Hare?
Yes. O'Hare. No offense to the late O'Hare, but Box and Lighter, I thought, knocked it out of the park as far as just raw screen charisma.
No, Dave's going to disagree. Dave's going to disagree.
Right. No.
He's a Sinclair man.
The Gathering, and I think that there's a sort of Pike-style warmth and intelligence that and I think a sense of greater experience than the boyish Boxleitner.
But I like my Boxleitner Captain Kirk, and you like your
I do. I actually had to be won over by Boxleitner, and so did fans at the time in the 90s. There was JMS was like, wait till you see this episode, and then you'll turn around. This was not an uncommon perspective at the time, but I do know that it's kind of, I think people have turned a little bit on him. But I have always liked God, I just said his name.
Sinclair. O'Hare.
O'Hare
played Sinclair.
I thought there was nuance to it. Did you think, Brian, that like he's like the acting is campy or something, or what's the?
It wasn't charismatic. I never. Some people say he's a bad actor. I never had a problem believing that he could do what he did or say what he said. He always felt like a real person to me, or at least as real as any of these somewhat elevated characters feel. But I guess Box and Lighter felt like the guy who could lead me into battle and I might actually follow him. Whereas O'Hare, I guess I might be go into battle because I was more scared of him making him angry. But
he felt more like a guy who could run the station to me. I felt like he had the experience.
He's more authoritative
and the authoritative qualities there, and that Sinclair looked a little like he was always like, wow, like he was Owen Wilson. Wow.
Well, he kind of has a little bit like that politician type of kind of, how like guys like Mitt Romney or like John Kerry, they always have that smile. They're always just like,
yeah,
It's,
right, that the fakey smile. And again,
but that kind of works with Sheridan. That works with Sheridan. If you see the arc his character goes on, it actually works well to have that be part of it.
So.
By the way, I see, in addition to people, I'm glad to see some people in the comments that are Sinclair fans as well.
Yes,
but I also,
Blue is here.
They brought
Blue
up Morden,
prefers Sinclair.
And as I have not watched in a while, I have to. I need to remind myself. Is it in season 1 that there's a sequence where Morden is like in a holding cell? Is that season 1?
No.
Or is that later?
No, that's later.
Okay, then I won't go on into any sort of detail about it. But I did find him, I remember, an intriguing early, kind of unnerving figure.
Yeah.
And I also, but they do introduce, who's the telepath guy?
Talia?
No, Walter Koenig.
No.
Oh, Baxter.
Bester.
Wait, no.
Or Bester.
Bester, yes. He does show up, though, right?
Yeah, he's in season 1.
Yeah, he's in an episode called, I think it's called Mind War.
Yeah.
Mind War, 6th episode. By the way, that was the one that like really hooked Antonia. It was like when she saw him, she was like, "Oh, cool, it's Chekhov." And then that's a good episode. It's a good episode.
He's a charismatic, creepy dude.
And again, that's something that like you wouldn't see in Star Trek. Like you wouldn't have like the Federation. I know they have like Section 31, but that's supposed to be like this secret black ops thing that no one knows about. Like the Psi Corps is powerful, and they're kind of oppressive in like how much power and authority they have.
But I wouldn't say it's a million miles from the way the Vulcans were treating T'Pol in Enterprise. In that T'Pol is tied to this other organization, and even though she's one of the regulars, this other organization can come in and make her life hell, and can cause problems for Jonathan Archer and stuff. The Vulcan Science Directorate, and so it even though the idea of the Psi Corps existing as humans is weird. If you just put some bumpy foreheads on them, the Psi Corps felt like something you could imagine in Star Trek easily enough. I
think it was interesting to me that it was so sort of front and center to the stories there. I actually loved the kind of the corruption and all of that stuff. Early in the first episode, isn't there like it's the eve of an election and they're chattering about that. Just the notion that they'd be talking about news and the election, that was anti-Trek.
Or reading newspapers.
Yeah.
Which is kind of dying out now.
Well, died. Yeah, but yeah, I can't fault them for not predicting everything. It is still a stylized sci-fi show that was for sure influenced by the likes of Trek and stuff like that. And they don't always do super serious. How would things really have changed? Yeah.
They also watch 4x3 CRT monitors. So,
but yeah,
which to be fair, there are CRTs in Star Trek too.
Yeah. They're all touch screens though, so it's not as bad.
Okay.
They're touch screens in both, aren't they?
Another thing that really stands out to me is like, no way in hell did this happen in Star Trek is the episode Infection, where Dr. Franklin's old professor brings on that artifact that turns that dude into a weapon.
Yep. In what way would that not happen in Star Trek?
Because at the end of the episode, the government comes and they're like, "Oh, we're going to take this and study it." Starfleet would never do that.
I remember that being a kind of hokey episode, but I kind of, 18-year-old Dave or whatever was like, "Hey, it's kind of cool action," and it was. I like mysterious artifacts and things like that. It was another one of those. That was a neat one of those. I like the idea more than the execution.
And it had Steed from Sapphire and Steel, or Steel from Sapphire and Steel.
I don't know what that is.
David McCallum is the actor's name. I think he did some sort of cop show or something in the US, but
that was a British show, right? That you're talking about.
Sapphire and Steel, yeah, it was ITV's answer to Doctor Who, and it had Joanna Lovely and David McCallum. And they were mysterious people from another plane of existence come to protect the world from demons from another dimension.
Have you ever heard of that, Robbie?
No, I've not heard of that. But I just want to say, I feel like I agree that Sinclair felt quite grounded. I'm not sure how I feel about the actor yet. I don't think he was bad. I don't want to say anything bad about the actor because I read that he was going through schizophrenia, which must have been quite.
It's funny because I never, I know that JMS kept that in close confidence. I think until the actor passed away. Is that correct?
Yeah, he didn't reveal until after he'd passed away.
It is not something, I think now. Hopefully that's something that they could be more open about, and it wouldn't have to be so taboo. Certainly in the 90s it probably was, but I'm impressed both on the part of Sinclair for that actor for his portrayal, but also JMS for being a good friend and a supporter, in a way that helped his friend out. It is not something I ever honestly would have guessed, but I guess that goes for most characters on a show. I don't think about what struggles they might be going with behind the scenes.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that he plays this kind of haunted character is certainly, you have to question how much of that might have been him just playing some of his own life in there. But it probably
lent some texture to it, if nothing else.
Yeah. it is very sad, and I'm not a Sinclair hater. I just like Sheridan better. But
You just know who you'd follow into battle. That's
yeah, exactly. I'm not even sure that's a good idea, but he'd probably talk me into it.
I have to quick note, Robbie. What did you think about like some of like an episode that is a little hokey, like Infection? How did that come across?
I was enjoying it until a point, and then I still was enjoying it, but I thought, this isn't as good as I thought it might be. And then I was talking to Jill, and I was saying I quite liked Infection, and then it went a wee bit off the rails, and then she said she didn't like it as much, but I still thought it was a good episode. It did feel a bit like a filler episode, but I did find it interesting, especially the archaeologist and the artifacts, and then he turned on Dr. Franklin, and obviously we got more of Dr. Franklin in that episode.
Yeah.
So I don't think it was bad.
That sounds
when I think of bad
how I
season
think I
one,
viewed it.
when
I'm
I think
sorry,
of bad,
Brian.
when I think of bad season one, I think of TKO and I think of Infection.
How dare you disrespect
those
Walker
might
Smith.
be the very bottom, my two least favorite Babylon 5s of all time, perhaps.
I would
don't
follow
know.
Walker Smith into battle, okay?
You know what I love about that episode, though, is because we get Walker Smith, and we also get Ivanova's cool rabbi. And we have
The B plot is good, yeah.
Well, we have these very separate A plot and B plot in that episode, but the episode opens where like the two of them are like walking off of the flight over to the station, and they're like, "Oh, it's nice chatting with you." And it's like these two like really likable dudes. Like you just can imagine like, oh yeah, they probably had like a fun conversation on the way over here. They're like, I don't know, I just like I'm glad that like those two guys got to meet each other, even if it was all off screen and we didn't get to see it. But yeah, it's weird how in the first season, I guess because they chose to play Ivanova without a Russian accent. I feel like in almost every episode, she has to remind us that she's Russian. I was telling like Antonia, like, okay, they'll stop doing this after a while. Like they'll figure that like you get the point. But that was another thing, was having a Jewish character who like practices some of her religion as something that they, Roddenberry wouldn't have wanted on Star Trek. He wanted, very secular humans in his future, whereas Straczynski wanted to be more of a reflection of modern day.
I was, I think, I'm going to say coming into my atheism right around that age, but I liked a realistic portrayal, including a sympathetic portrayal of scope of religions in fiction, and so that was another area where I was like, I'm more interested in this, or I like what this is doing better than Star Trek. And I wanted to quick mention the episode, I think it's Parliament of Dreams, that has a very fascinating ending about the sort of diversity of Earth's religions. Always one of my favorite endings to the show. It's it's a week to celebrate cultural, religious significance on the station. And with a little bit of kind of campy humor, you see all the different sort of alien rituals and stuff.
The Centauri do it the best.
Do they have like a big party drinking kind of?
Yeah, I'm totally down for some Centauri hedonism. Like I'm a Narn sympathizer. Like I'm always gonna side like against imperialism and side on the oppressed. But I got to give it to the Centauri. Like I would much rather party with them.
They does that first season also have the one where Londo falls for a stripper dancer?
Yes. Yeah, that's the purple, Born to the Purple.
Yeah, that was a pretty girl too. Right, but yeah, that ending where the camera pans along and you see that Sinclair is introducing all the ambassadors to a rabbi and an imam and a priest and all this, and the camera pans down and there's like dozens and dozens of other religious leaders represented. I was like, what a fascinating kind of celebration of diversity of the the Eidic philosophy in a non-Eidic show.
And not in another show or another scene you wouldn't have gotten it probably in Star Trek. So certainly not when Roddenberry was around. But
well, Blue.
Thank you to Blue.
Blue
Stark,
wants to think
I did get a haircut a few
think
weeks ago at
Dave's
some point, so
amazing hair, but
I'll take the compliment.
she also tells me that I guess I should cosplay as a Centauri, which I do have enough hair. If I could, I don't know what because it's kind of humid in Texas. I think it'd be hard to get it to stand up like that, but I'm sure there's a product I could use to create the Londo hair crest. So at the top of the show, I said there is a funny story about that, and I think I should share it now. If this is true, I think I heard this from a JMS commentary on the DVDs. But as I recall, JMS talked about the origin of the ridiculous Centauri hair crest, and it came from conversations with Peter Jurassic, who would play Londo. They were trying to figure out the look of Londo, and they would base the race on whatever Londo was going to look like. And they were talking about doing something kind of simple. They wanted them to look mostly human, but just a little alien detail. And they're talking about like something weird with the hair, and they had like this room of wigs. And Peter Jurassic took the one that he thought was the most ridiculous, and he put it on, and he said, "Hey, I like this one. How about it?" And he meant it as a joke. Straczynski sees this, thinking that he meant it, and he's like, "That's kind of stupid, but I don't know if the actor wants to do it. I guess we can try to make it work." He's like, "Oh, yeah, I can, we can go with that. Yeah, that's a good idea." And then Jurassic is thinking like, "Oh my God, the showrunner likes this. Well, I'm not going to like argue with him now. I guess I'll just go along with it." And it wasn't until years later that the truth came out that they both actually didn't like it, but that's... it's one of the most iconic things of the show, and I remember like as a kid I remember like talking to my aunt who watched a lot of genre shows and stuff about Babylon 5 one time, and she's like, "I could never watch that because of that stupid hair."
I remember in the first episode, I think I was like having a bit of a reaction to the hair, and I was just like, "It's just too campy, it's just too goofy," or whatever. And then, starting to by the end of that first episode, it's that Londo has some depth to him. If I'm remembering right, there's kind of an interesting heart-to-heart between him and Garibaldi, who suggests this sort of unusual friendship between the head of security and this pompous ass of kind of somewhat pathetic and yet aggressive ambassador. And then they kind of have they come to terms or whatever, and Londo does not try and. What, he's going to kill Jakar, right?
Yeah, we're talking about Midnight on the Firing Line. It's the first like proper episode after the movie, after The Gathering.
And so by the end of it, I was like, you know what? I think this actor has won me over to it, and it fit the kind of the pomp and circumstance of their colonial, British 18th century look, which was also just a great idea for one of the key alien races was this in decline empire, a failing desperate colonialists. I thought was really cool.
Yeah.
Very, very relatable to like 21st century United States empire in decline.
100%.
As long as we're acknowledging...
Go ahead.
As long as we're acknowledging shout-outs from the comments here. Thank you, Andrea or Alexandra, for all the nice comments. So,
always good, excellent comments.
Well,
I wanted to just quick mention Blue was like, somebody needs to talk about the good-looking guys on B5, and I'm like, until Marcus shows up, I have nothing to say. Until his locks unfurl, the Aragorn of B5 has not arrived yet.
I could cosplay as the fat Marcus Cole. I got the beard and the hair flowing. I totally forgot that there's a dude in season 2 named Warren Kiefer. I completely erased that character from my memory. I don't remember any scenes with him.
Who is he? Remind me.
He's a pilot. He's a fighter pilot.
Yeah, recurring character?
Yeah.
The squad, no, he's in the opening credits.
Yeah.
Like, wow. I had totally forgotten. Dave apparently forgot him too. I was like,
the story of that guy, right?
Yeah, I after I watched that first episode, it started to come back, and I remember what happens to the character, but yeah, I totally forgotten that. But yeah, there's the characters are great. I think the actors are great. Every now and then, there's like some guest stars on here. It's like, yeah, you're kind of like a mediocre day actor, but what are you gonna do? The show is made on a limited budget, but it's definitely a character show. That moment you're talking about, Dave, with that Londo.
Say again.
I was just gonna say, like, that episode you were talking about, like that Londo and Garibaldi stuff, like the end of Midnight on the Firing Line. Mm-hmm. It was like actually like that moment where seeing like the chemistry between them, but also like the moment at the end where Garibaldi says, "Londo, in 20 minutes we're gonna have to come search your quarters, make sure we don't find anything." And I was just like, "Wow!" Like Odo never would have said that,
right?
like Worf, Tuvok, none of them would be playing that. Yeah,
Garibaldi was compromised a little bit from the beginning, or if not compromised, flawed and textured. He was recovering alcoholic. Right? I think that plays a role.
One can make the point that what Garibaldi's trying to do there, more than anything, is to stop an interstellar war. And, the humans finding a gun in Londo's quarters are not going to help with that point. So,
I think it felt like to me, though, it was as much a personal thing as, at least this is my memory of it, as anything where he was like, I know what it's like to fuck up, and I'm gonna. This is a weird little connection between us, and I'm gonna help you avoid fucking up today.
Yeah, I'd agree with that too. But
Dave, what were you saying before I cut you off?
Shit. I might have lost my train of thought. Yeah, I think I lost my train of thought.
Well,
Sorry.
If you think about it, I just wanted to ask each of y'all, were there any final thoughts you wanted to bring up? The only thing that I have left that I wanted to say is just the amount of world building they do in the show. They set up all these different alien species, within one season. I feel like, the Vorlons are still very mysterious. We don't know hardly anything about them, but that's what makes them cool. The Minbari are incredibly mysterious, but we finally start, we reveal a lot about Delenn over the course of the season, and then going into season 2, you kind of have a lot of questions answered about the Earth-Minbari war. That was such a cool concept. The Minbari were just like obliterating all of Earth, and we're about to attack Earth, and then right when they're about to win the war, they surrender. And it's just like this huge mystery. Why the hell did that happen?
It's a super cool mystery. It's a great hook.
And the Narn and Centauri stuff with like it is very much Cardassian and Bajoran, and no, I don't think Babylon 5 ripped off DS9. I don't think DS9 ripped off Babylon 5. I think that's just a coincidence, but it is very similar to that dynamic, and that stuff set up pretty well in season 1. So yeah, they do an incredible amount of world building, and I think this first season is a great example of what you can do world building. But that's all I got to say. Earl Grey Trekkie, do you have any final thoughts?
I really enjoyed the show. But I feel like we were kind of missing something with the alien side. We did get, alien-centric episodes, but at the start I thought we would see more of G'Kar, and I was a bit disappointed that we didn't see more of him because he interested me a bit. To me, he felt a bit like a lovable rogue, a bit like Quark.
Yeah.
And then I really liked Delenn too because she was so different. And then I think we got a fair amount of Delenn in the show. And also you were saying about Delenn was possibly going to have a masculine voice, but I think that would have been really nice to have on screen. But I think her feminine voice kind of added to her soothing alien nature and that unique voice that she had.
Yeah, absolutely. There's just no doubt that she brought a lot to the table on that.
And Robbie, you will get more G'Kar stuff. G'Kar is he is my favorite character of the show, but all the reasons why he's my favorite character, those haven't happened yet in season 1. So there's some great G'Kar stuff there. I think you're really gonna love it.
Though I would argue the land where giants walk or whatever is a tip of the iceberg to that G'Kar.
Yes.
So
well said.
Yeah, I just wanted to quick point out, Geek in Review, I really like their comment about Garibaldi's vibe. They say Garibaldi felt like a beat cop in 70s New York.
Yeah, well, I think that might have been...
That's a good assessment.
JMS grew up in 70s New York, so that might have been that might have been what he was based on.
Yeah.
JMS, he's a kid from New Jersey, right?
I can't remember.
I think that's right. He's got an interesting and somewhat storied life. When I've occasionally peeked in and heard about it, it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah. I've heard amazingly good things about his autobiography, Becoming Superman. So, and that you should not get too upset about the pretentious title. I haven't actually read it, but it's read by Londo, so I'm at the audiobook version, which has me even more interested.
It'd be cooler if he did it in the Londo accent.
I doubt he does it in the Londo voice.
It was the best of times. It was the worst of times.
Dave,
by the way, you cannot watch Peter Jurassic and not want to do the accent.
Yeah.
That is the power of Babylon 5.
Yeah.
Dave, what are your final thoughts on Babylon 5 Season 1?
You know, it's interesting. In this discussion, I've realized I have this outpouring of things that there are also fond memories of it that we haven't gotten to, whether it's the if not amazingly portrayed, but the realistic physics of the Star Furies. It's a badass name. They're badass-looking ships. The look of the station itself and the rotating the realism of the different rotational portions to create different gravity, all those details that I loved, and the fact that the Zocalo was like is that the bar, like where they had the bar and stuff like that? Yeah, that it felt like a sort of lived-in place. Christopher Frankie's music, I think did he come out of Vangelis, was it, or Tangerine Dream?
I'm in the Zocalo now, Dave.
Oh yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Neon, baby.
Where you come here to drink Zima.
Yes.
Robbie, you don't know what a Zima is, do you?
No.
That's before your time.
Lost drink of the 90s. The forbidden drink, the absinthe of the 90s.
But they're going to bring it back for the 23rd century. So
yeah.
I mean, if White Claw can make it. I liked the music on it too, even if it was like the script's a little too heightened at times. But I love that kind of electronic score coming out of one of the guys, I believe, from Vangelis, aka the Blade Runner music guys. It's bringing back a lot of fond memories for me. I'd like to pause time right now so I can go and watch all of season 1. But yeah, it's been fun. It's been fun talking about it. I'm glad Robbie is enjoying it, and I look forward to hearing what he says as he gets to season 2 and kind of deeper into, I guess I'd say, the meta plot stuff.
Yeah. It's exciting. It's exciting to hear about the show from someone seeing it for the first time through very modern eyes. And
I've heard really great things about up to season 4. So I look forward to watching that.
There's some good stuff in season 5.
Yeah,
like the last episode of the show, I would call it a must watch.
Right, I've heard that many a time, and I haven't done it.
I would call. I mean, season 5 is weaker than 2, 3, and 4, but I still like it better than 1. Season 1.
That's just because you hate Sinclair.
But if he was leading the battle, Brian would push him into the field of fire.
Yeah. You go get grabbed by the Mimbari.
Well, Brian, what are your final thoughts on Babylon 5 Season 1?
I need to give another shout out to David Warner because I love David Warner. And David Warner.
David Warner's biggest fan.
That's legit. David Warner is such a great presence.
Yes,
I thought you were going to say such a great president because he was like the Klingon president in Star Trek 6.
Yeah.
Yes, it was a bit of an odd segue, but.
Yeah, no, I thought he was a great doctor in Big Finish's alternate timeline Doctor Who audios, which are David Warner plays the Doctor.
I primarily think of him as a villain because I have not seen those roles, but I loved him when he played Bob Cratchit in a production of Christmas Carol. So I've seen him play nice. And does he not play like the Grail Seeker?
Yes. He's also in an episode with Brad Dourif, who just had a birthday, I think.
Isn't he Ra's al Ghul in Batman the Animated Series? Yeah. That was my introduction to Ra's. I had never read any comics with Ra's al Ghul until I saw that. Yeah.
He loomed large in the 90s in some sort of nerd circles, and he starred in like the highest grossing movie of all time in Titanic as a heavy in that. He's like the
other point I wanted to get out there is that the sets and production and special effects and the spaceships might have not been the greatest. I think Babylon 5 has some of the best makeup and some of the best makeup and costumes. Certainly, it will stand up to anything that came out in Star Trek or Deep Space Nine or Voyager as far as makeup and costuming went. And at least they're better. Some of the costumes were cheap, but the ones where they put some time into it were amazing costumes and utterly iconic and memorable. And
Kosh is an amazing visual with his little iris lensing
Yeah.
eye.
That's my profile picture on Facebook right now.
Yeah.
Kosh.
And I mean, you could make Jakar work with just that amazing costume he wears. That would have been enough to say, wow, every time he walks into the room. But he's also got this brilliant makeup job done on him as well. And Londo's outfits and the uniforms, once they add a little bit of the leather trim, which wasn't there in the pilot. But yeah, the costuming and makeup, I have to give a shout out to that, because that doesn't look cheap or low budget at all at any point in the show.
Right on.
Yeah, no, the production design is great, and they spend their smaller budget well.
Yes.
Oh, hey, let's quick throw that question to Robbie. What did you think of Kosh, his mysteries? Somebody inquires. He can review.
I was a bit confused where it was going, because we didn't really get too much about him.
Yeah, you're close to some big reveals though. Like by the end of season 2, you'll know a bit more.
Did you like the mysteriousness, the kind of speaking in riddles sort of thing, or was it like,
Yeah, I like speaking in riddles, that kind of style. I think it can be a bit cheesy, but I find this to be a cheesy show with some great stories and great characters. And at the end of the day, as long as you have great stories and great characters, it's okay to be a bit cheesy and a bit corny.
Yeah, it's even kind of fun to have some of that cheesy flavor on there.
Yeah.
I think.
So you didn't
90s,
just.
I think I've talked about this before. Go ahead, Brian.
You didn't just think that he was a jukebox that plays only fortune cookies.
No,
The 90s had
that's what they called him, the jukebox.
I don't know, say like camp in its in a very campy form. And by the way, I know Babylon 5 was certainly not intended it, but I was thinking of stuff like, I don't know, Xena and Hercules, and a lot of sort of genre shows like that. Did still had some camp. Even the Batman movies that were coming out at the time, from Joel Schumacher. There was things got a lot more self-serious in the Battlestar Galactica 2000s, and occasionally I miss that larger than life kind of campy quality that, yes, unintentionally Babylon 5 had. I know they didn't really particularly mean it to have. I think they wanted it to have humor, but not to be campy. But that's just who JMS is. It's kind of campy.
Okay. Yeah, and the funny thing about the Vorlon, I just remember like the story of where the actor Bruce Boxleitner is talking about. It was again one of the commentaries I listened to on the DVD, but it was a scene from a later season where he's in kind of like a heated discussion with Kosh. And he's like, yelling at Kosh about, like, why won't you just tell us what to, or something like that. And Bruce Boxleitner's
in a heated discussion.
Sheridan.
Got it.
But Bruce Boxleitner is talking about like he's laughing as he's watching himself act, because he's like, oh my god, this was so hard to do, was to act against this jukebox. And he's like look at this, like this is the longest, most passionate conversation I've ever had with an object.
I remember, reading actually a kind of a moving story about how Ian McKellen struggled with all the blue screen or green screen stuff on the Lord of the Rings movies, and he's most A-list of A-list actors, but he was just breaking. He was almost like in tears, he said, because he would have to act against like a prop and have nothing coming back at him, and from a guy who came from theater, it was a kind of miserable experience. I could tell. I know it's difficult. So kudos to all of that, because I felt like Kosh, he seemed like a presence to me anyway. I liked his mystery. It always felt like you were going to visit, a seer in a fantasy story, which there's a lot of Lord of the Rings in this, including some of the names in places like Zahadum and things like that. There's definitely a Lord of the Rings influence throughout. I don't even want to say some of the names because I don't want to accidentally ruin anything for Robbie.
Well, yeah, and that Grail episode with David Warner, that has some cool Kosh stuff in it, because that's the one where they have the fake Kosh that was the brain eater.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But the way it's so creepy how it's presented, and it's a good example of like doing. I guess it might be too corny for some people, but I think it was a fun way to do cool stuff on a small budget. It was just like the voice they gave it and stuff like that. You know, obviously they're using like the same prop as I don't know if you'd call it prop or wardrobe, but the Kosh prop / wardrobe. I guess.
I seem to recall that in some of the shots it clearly was an inferior version of the.
Oh, it might have been
the cheap Kosh.
Yeah.
Which worked within the narrative because it really wasn't him. It is a copy, but I do remember thinking, oh wow, they didn't even use the same costume, at least not all the time.
Okay, well, I just want to say, sorry, I'm talking to Sohel. I'm trying to figure out if there's going to be a Starfleet Boy After Dark tonight or not.
I know he has his own technical issues that are afoot right now.
Well, while he's figuring that out, I'll throw out a question. Do we buy that they have souls in the Babylon 5 universe?
It was a kind of a big thing early on, whether it was the Soul Hunter or... Have they? I want to be very careful about talking around this. Have they talked much about Beyond the Soul Hunter episode, or maybe that was
not until season 2. They get into it like at the beginning of season 2.
And there's something very key that I don't really want to say too much about because that would reveal a lot. But there's something I think clearly.
If you the way that JMS has explained it, like if you believe in an afterlife and souls are real, then the soul hunters are like pretty terrible because they're taking your soul and keeping them from that. If you don't believe in the afterlife, then soul hunters are pretty cool because their technology gives them a way to like preserve your consciousness and memories. So
I remember watching that episode and thinking that the soul hunters argument, aside from I thought he looked cool too. He just looked dope as hell.
Yeah,
he's like a badass. But that he made a compelling case, I thought, and that was an interesting thing to see from a villain. I was like, oh wait, is he kind of in the right? Wait, no, but it's an interesting tightrope.
Well, but I hope everyone enjoyed listening to us talk about Babylon 5. I don't know what kind of reaction this will get, but if people seem to like it, then maybe we'll talk about seasons 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. We got a lot of Star Trek to talk about, so that'll always be the top priority here, but there may or may not be a Starfleet Boy After Dark stream later tonight because Sohel is having some technical issues. So if you did want to stay up late and check out Starfleet Boy After Dark, just go check out the Starfleet Boy Twitter, and we'll let you know over there, I'm sure. So other than that, we'll be back next week with talking about some real Star Trek, not fake off-brand Kmart Babylon 5 Star Trek. We're going to be talking about the real stuff. Dave and I are actually talking about Deep Space Nine. We did a Deep Space Nine Season 1 podcast like 3 years ago. We're just now getting around to... Hey, there's been a lot of Star Trek the last 3 years.
Yeah.
We're just now getting around to going back to that station, and we're going to talk about DS9 Season 2. It's going to be a 2-part series.
That was the very show I shunned because of Babylon 5. I was like, fuck you, Deep Space Nine. I'm watching some real sci-fi. So now here I am in a Trek podcast much later, and we'll see how things pan out on the revisit.
But for the record, I do think out of all the other space sci-fi shows, you know, besides Star Trek, we talk about like Battlestar Galactica, The Expanse, all that stuff. Babylon 5, I think, is the best. It is the best non-Star Trek space show. That being said, I like DS9 a lot more than B5. But, more about that next week when me and Dave talk about it. And until then, as always, live long and prosper, y'all. Or this is B5. How should I end it on B5?
It's our last best hope for peace.
There we go.
See you beyond the rim.
Later.